check one. Okay.
So I guess this is like bride and groom now. We've got the...
I don't even know what to say about that. I'm just.
It's not a beauty contest.
He said bride and groom, so I'm guessing I'm the groom, right? No, it's good. As we get started, there is new sheets out there. If you didn't notice, we have May starts this week. So you got a little bit of April. May starts here, and it's on front and back. You'll even see a little bit of June on there, too. So you can grab those on your way out if you haven't, or go get them now if you want to.
So Daryl and I are going to basically move through this Isaiah section today. But I thought, if you've done your reading, I'm hoping that this section of Isaiah came to life in a way that maybe it could have never done before because we spent so much time in Daniel, right? Anybody see anything in this section? Anything? There's lots of things. Did anybody see anything in this section of Isaiah that we read this week that just really struck them? Remember our question is what is important to God as we're reading through this? Is there anything in this passage that would tell you that there's important things to God? Anybody write anything down this week? So we're going to start with letting you guys talk before Daryl and I talk.
That empty worship is dangerous.
Ooh.
That's something that was really soggy, that the government and intelligentsia of the world will be exposed for their corruption and denial of God, and then there will be restoration. So, but emptiness, just doing it without the heart is just dangerous.
So empty worship is dangerous. You also said that the principalities, the governments, and all of their corruption would be brought to judgment, and change would come. What is empty worship? What's the difference between full worship and empty worship? Okay. Yes. I think it's really, I want to chase this rabbit for just a second because I think it's an interesting rabbit for us to chase. And that is a lot of times we try to impose our church ideas on the Old Testament. So when did people in the Old Testament go to church? How far could they go if they had to go to church? So going to church is our idea. Yeah, they could only walk so far, remember, because it was the Sabbath and you couldn't do work. So we kind of think of, well, they went to church. I mean, they went to synagogue and they had a service. Well, not exactly. And it wasn't necessarily on the Sabbath that they would meet. They would meet at different times. It was a community center, and worship, Old Testament worship, was focused around several key components. Old Testament worship would be focused around sacrifice, the ways of sacrifice, the times of sacrifice. Old Testament worship would be based around special days, right? Day of Atonement, Day of Jubilee.
And that sacrifice usually meant they were having big feasts like Thanksgiving or Christmas afterwards.
Right. Sacrifices for sin, those were done at the temple. Those weren't necessarily done on any specified day, but you would go before the priest, and there'd be other people in there doing the exact same thing. So there was a public record, if you will, of sacrifices given, and depending on what you walked into the temple with, everybody knew what you were sacrificing for, right? So why would I bring this up, this idea that they don't have church like this in the Old Testament under the topic of empty worship? I'm wondering, is empty worship coming here on Sunday and saying that even though I was really present on Sunday, but I'm not really present on Monday through Saturday, what does that do to the quality of my worship being received by God on Sunday? Nullifies it, diminishes it, certainly, right? So am I a Christian 7 days a week? Am I following God 7 days a week? And that's a lot of what we're getting ready to look at here in Isaiah is this, who are God's people and where did they go? And why did they have to go into captivity? So I want to start in chapter 39. The title on chapter 39 in my Bible was Envoys from Babylon. This is
Isaiah.
Yeah, Isaiah 39. So right off of the get-go, we are in the lead-up to God sending everybody into captivity. And Isaiah is going to prophesy about how that's going to go. Let me do one more thing before we race ahead. I want to talk real quick about Bible scholarship, Bible theologians that study books like this. There is a lot of good that comes out of people who study the Bible professionally. There's a lot of good that is coming out about people who are going through all the archaeological finds and finding all of the texts and the potsherds that have writing on them and the history that's becoming clearer and clearer. I was talking to Jacob before class, and he was saying that a lot of Bible theologians said David was a made-up person because they had no archaeological record of him. And we all kind of go, what? But finally they found a courtyard that was his. And so, maybe that was him. And as he said, some said, well, that was a different David. I say that because there are a lot of scholars that try to tell us that the book of Isaiah is actually either, there's lots of views, but they would tell us that there's actually 3 books of Isaiah, although Isaiah does have kind of 3 core prophecy sections to it. And a lot of them will tell you that this last section of Isaiah was written after the events of Babylon, and it had to be because, someone want to tell me why? Because it names Cyrus and it names events that are getting ready to happen before Cyrus. So if our idea of prophecy is that if it accurately tells the future, then it must be written by somebody later. What's our idea of prophecy? Is Isaiah prophecy or is it history? It's prophecy. It's really good prophecy. Which is why I thought about maybe calling today's class, It Ain't Bragging If You Can Do It. So much of this text that we've read this week is God basically saying, I am so in control of future events that I'm going to tell you specific details and processes and experiences that you are going to have as a nation in the coming years in such detail that you shouldn't be able to miss it when it happens and you look back. What were some of the things that you guys read that made you go, whoa, that's a Daniel moment? Can anybody think of anything that you read where you go, whoa, that's going to happen? Somebody go to Isaiah 43, verse 2. And it might be verse 2 and 3, but Start reading in 2.
Will be with you, and when you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. I give Egypt for your ransom, Cush and Sheba in your stead.
Okay, so can you think of anything in there that sounds Daniel-ish? Yeah, it says had Shadrach, had the spokesperson for the three of them, did he read this and go, this is the moment to see that this is the God that we serve? They would have read this. They would have heard this. And they said, we don't know if God's going to follow through on this for us. We're not sure 100% if he was writing it about the three of us. But we are certainly not, after all of the things that are said in this section of Isaiah, we are certainly not going to worship an idol. There's 3 or 4 really big sections in this passage, this group of chapters in Isaiah that talk about idols. What does God basically have to say about idols? They're an abomination. They're blind, mute, and dumb. And not just they can't speak, but just dumb. Do you guys like the passage that talks about the guy who goes and cuts down a tree and uses some of the wood to heat his house and bake his bread and then carves the rest of it and worships it? He's basically going, this is dumb. You're spending all of your gold on stuff that doesn't do anything. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had read that. They understood that. And so to have somebody put up a big statue and say, I'm going to worship, or saying, hey, we're going to, only worship the king, they're like, no, we're not doing that. Somebody flip over to chapter 47, if you would, and read 5 through 11, but special attention to verse 9.
So 5 through 11?
5 through 11.
With whom will you compare me or count me equal? To whom will you liken me that we may be compared? Some pour out gold from their bags and weigh out silver on the scales. They hire a goldsmith to make it into a god, and they bow down and they worship it. They lift it to their shoulders and carry it. They set it up in its place, and there it stands. From that spot it cannot move. Even though someone cries out to it, it cannot answer. It cannot save them from their troubles. Remember this, keep it in mind, take it to heart, you rebels. Remember the former things, those of long ago. I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come. I say my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. From the east I summon a bird of prey, from a far-off land, a man to fulfill my purpose. What I have said that I will bring about, what I have planned, that I will do.
Is that 47? Okay, that's helpful for all the idol stuff.
Was really good.
If we can get 47, 5 through 11.
Sit in silence and go into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for you shall no more be called the mistress of kingdoms. I was angry with my people, I profaned my heritage. I gave them into your hand, you showed them no mercy. On the aged you made your yoke exceedingly heavy. You said, I shall be mistress forever, so that you did not lay these things to heart or remember their end. Now therefore hear this, you lover of pleasures, who sit securely, who say in your heart, I am, and there is no one besides me. I shall not sit as a widow or know the loss of children. These two things shall come to you in a moment, in one day, The loss of children and widowhood shall come upon you in full measure, in spite of your many sorceries and the great power of your enchantments. You felt secure in your wickedness. You said, no one sees me. Your wisdom and your knowledge led you astray. And you said in your heart, I am, and there is no one besides me. But evil shall come upon you, which you will not know how to charm away. Disaster will fall upon you, for which you will not be able to atone. And ruin shall come upon you suddenly, of which you know nothing.
So these things are going to come on Babylon in a day. Does that sound familiar to anything that Daryl preached about?
Did you notice the serendipity of the reading from 46, where God says the very things
Yes.
about himself? I am God, there is none besides me. And then here, they're saying, I am special, and there's no one besides me.
Yeah, so Daryl, question. Why is it that the writing on the wall happens? Why is it that we find ourselves in the situation where Babylon's going to be defeated in a day? What is it about the ruler at that point that makes God so mad? Let's refresh that.
Well, he goes and gets the items from the temple, and they decide to drink from those as they're nothing. So it's that profanity that we talked about, profaning the name of God as if God is nothing. And basically, he sees himself as a God.
So we're in a situation where God is not only going to prophesy that Babylon is going to fall in one day, but he's prophesying the reason that Babylon is going to fall in one day. And it's going to be because of their arrogance and their pride, and they feel like they have a special position that no one can do anything about. And he's going to take them out in one day.
When it says in that story, too, he knew the story of Nebuchadnezzar. He knew the story of Nebuchadnezzar going insane for 7 years and being humbled and coming back and saying, the God of Daniel is really God. He knew that and still decided to do his own thing.
So I want to, and I'm going to hand the ball over here to Daryl to go further than this, but I want to wrap this section up, this section of prophecy, this section of God saying, I have a plan, and my plan is going to be to save Israel. My plan is going to be to purify the nation. My plan is going to be to bring about a new thing. And it's going to, in order to do that, we're going to have to get rid of the idols, and we're going to have to change who Israel is, and there's going to be a time of purification, but I'm going to do this thing. It's going to be violent, it's going to be difficult, but my will is going to be done. I want to read for you, if we can, go back to 40. And I'm going to read 9 through 31, which is going to take a hot minute. God does not spend a lot of time on Twitter. 144 characters ain't going to do it when God has something to say. And so I know our attention spans have gotten shorter over time, but I'd like you to really try to plug in and listen. I'm going to do my best job I can reading, but really try to hear God's voice through this. Go on up to high mountain, O Zion, herald of good news. Lift up your voice with strength, O Jerusalem. Herald of good news. Lift it up, fear not. Say to the cities of Judah, behold your God. Behold, the Lord comes with might, and his arm rules for him. Behold, his reward is with him, and his recompense before him. He will tend his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms. He will carry them in his bosom and gently lead those that are with young. Who has measured the waters in the hollow of his hand and marked off the heavens with a span? Enclosed the dust of the earth in a measure and weighed the mountains in a scale and the hills in a balance? Who has measured the Spirit of the Lord? Or what man shows him counsel? Whom did he consult? And who made him understand? Who taught him the path of justice and taught him knowledge and showed him the way of understanding? Behold, The nations are like a drop from a bucket and are accounted as the dust on the scales. Behold, he takes up the coastlands like fine dust. Lebanon would not suffice for fuel, nor its beasts enough for a burnt offering. All the nations are as nothing before him. They are accounted by him as less than nothing and emptiness. To whom then will you liken God? Or what likeness compare with him? An idol? A craftsman casts it, and a goldsmith overlays it with gold and casts for it silver chains. He who is too impoverished for an offering chooses wood that will not rot, or that will not rot. He seeks out skillful craftsmen to set up an idol that will not move. Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been told you from the beginning? Have you not understood from the foundations of the earth? It is he who sits above the circle of the earth, and its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretch out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them like a tent to dwell in. Who brings princes to nothing and make the rulers of the earth as emptiness? Scarcely they are planted, scarcely sown, scarcely has their stem taken root in the earth, and when he blows on them, and they wither, and the tempest carries them off like stubble. To whom then will you compare me, that I should be like him, says the Holy One? Lift up your eyes high and see, who created these? Who brings out their host by number, calling them all by name, by the greatness of his might? And because he is strong in power, not one is missing. Why do you say, O Jacob, and speak, O Israel? My way is hidden from the Lord, and my right is disregarded by my God. Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable. He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might he increases strength. Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not be faint. How's our awe for God today? What's amazing to you? Is your internet speed amazing? Is it amazing that you can go on Amazon and order some Fritos and they can be there by 5 p.m.?
Universe as large as ours, simply by speaking. And he knows what's going to happen from beginning to end before it ever happens.
Yeah. I mean, I get it. These are people from a long time ago. They're easily impressed. Right? They don't even know what a car is yet. Right? They haven't even seen the incandescent light bulb. So I understand why we're hard to impress, right? Do we have awe for God today? Let me ask you a much scarier question. Do our children have awe for God today? Not rhetorical. It's a legit question.
I would say our kids do. Like if you ever in children's worship, they are just so grateful, just in so in awe of this magical, wonderful world, and they give God all the credit. And it's just a sweet reminder of that's how Jesus even said, be like the children.
Can I tell you that I think that some of the best work going on in this congregation right now happens over in that building on Sunday mornings for our children?
Absolutely.
I know our missions committee isn't involved with that, but that's the best local missions program we have right now. And we need to be grateful for it every day. How can we get our awe back for God? How can it be that when we get up Monday morning and we have to face our work, that we can say to ourselves, you know what, it doesn't really matter because God knows everything that's going to happen today, and he loves me, and I know he loves me because he gave his son for me. They didn't even have that information. How can I get my awe back?
I think when you trust God to show up in big ways, and sometimes ways that almost seem impossible, you find yourself in awe, because I think in the times that I have in life, God has actually shown up.
You know, prophecy is great because you look back and you realize it was true, right? In a way, that's what you're saying is that I'm going to trust that God shows up, and then later I look back and I go, he really did. I feel that, I know that in my life. It's not a question. God has been there at some really important times, and he's been there in a lot of little ways that I don't know to give credit for. Let me encourage you, if you didn't read this week, to go back and read, because this reading this week is awe-inspiring. These discussions about who God is and asking questions that today we can't answer about the breadth and depth and power and majesty of the God who is in charge and who makes things happen and knows ahead of time they're going to happen regardless of the plans of men. Daryl?
Yeah, we use the word awesome a lot. And just think about how we use that word. Oh, that dinner was awesome. I just think it's the same like the way we use the word love. You know? What do we really love, and what are we really awed by? And I think that's what we got to pass on to the next generation. And if we're awed or loving the wrong thing, we need to think about that before we pass on those things. I wanted to go back to chapter 39 for just a second, talk a little bit more about Hezekiah. Hezekiah does so good. And I got to give him props because he is one of the best kings during a really evil time, but it's almost like he fumbles the ball at the 1 yard line. You know? How do we see the life of Hezekiah end? And we're talking about passing it on to the next generation. Probably one of the most disturbing lines in all the Old Testament happens from Hezekiah in the end of 39. So just a little bit of backstory. The king of Babylon comes for a visit. Hezekiah thinks this is a great thing, invites him in. Would you like to see what's inside my safe? Basically. Do you want to know the combination and everything? Oh, by the way, I have some stuff out back that you haven't seen yet, too. Let's go look at all that. So no wonder the king of Babylon goes home and says, get ready, boys. We're going to go pillage. And but God says, this is going to, let me just start reading, and I'll start reading verse 4 of chapter 39 of Isaiah. The prophet asks, so Isaiah comes to Hezekiah. What did this king see in your palace? Oh, they saw everything in my palace. There was nothing among my treasures that I did not show them. Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, hear the word of the Lord Almighty. The time will surely come when everything in your palace and all that your predecessors have stored up until this day will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left, says the Lord, and some of your descendants, your own flesh and blood, who will be born to you, will be taken away, and they will become eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. That's bad enough. Now let's read Hezekiah's response in verse 8. The word of the Lord you have spoken is good, Hezekiah replied, for he thought there will be peace and security in my lifetime. Now again, I just preached on self-righteousness, so I got to be very careful here, right? My goodness. Hezekiah to me right here kind of has a David moment when he counted the fighting men towards the end of his life. This is that pride of Hezekiah of like, this is all mine. Do you want to see what I have? And it doesn't matter what the toy is. We always want to show off our toys, whether it be a car or whether it be a palace or whatever it is. And Isaiah says, oh man, this is all going to Babylon. Everything is going away. verse 8 just disturbs me. What you said is good. Because you know why? It's not going to happen to me. We got to make sure that we're passing the baton to the next generation. And it's easy for us to think, you ever notice that every generation thinks the other generation is just stupid? Well, they just don't get it. Young people think that about us. We think that about young people a lot of times. And the next generation that's coming up will think about those young people who think they got it all together. When they're adults and they're the parents, they'll say the same thing about them. Right? But this idea of, hey, this is great because it won't happen in my lifetime. I wonder if sometimes we have that mentality. Oh, look at the church today. Look at all the problems they have. And sometimes we're like, well, 20 years, we won't have to worry about that. We won't be here. Or 30 years, 40 years, whatever. Did anybody else read that and just go, what do you think about that?
Made me wonder if that mentality of Hezekiah comes out unexpectedly is part of the reason why his son is probably the most wicked king in Judah's history. Because you know how kids are, they pick up on a lot of subtleties that we think they don't. But if he saw that attitude in his dad, maybe that prompted him to say, well, then obviously all other stuff about, how God's going to give me my life back and everything, that's just fairyland. I'm going to get me some idols up here that I can touch, that I can see. I don't know for sure, but that's what I thought about it. I thought it was it's a tragic story. That
It is a tragedy.
one thing right at the end, and it just leaves a bitter taste.
Yeah, I do think the good in Hezekiah's life should be celebrated too. I'm not throwing the guy completely under the bus. I'm just like, man, if only it would have ended better at the very end. Anyways, that was a big, I got a kick out of texting back and forth with John this week, because usually what we do is we each do our reading, and Saturday afternoon we'll text each other with things that we want to talk about or what we think you might want to talk about. And we said, hey, I think Isaiah 39 through like 44, 45, let's let that do the heavy lifting. And then we kept going and going, well, there's also Isaiah 52 and 53 that are pretty good. And then it's like, oh, don't forget Isaiah 61. That's really, really, we got through it. I was like, I really wish there was some material we could work with here, right? This is very rich and heavy stuff. So let me put it out there to you before I talk about anything else. Is there anything from the rest of the chapters in Isaiah that stands out to you that you want to comment on or have a question about?
Larry?
Yes, sir.
In looking at it in scope, especially in 2nd Chronicles, it's interesting, Hezekiah does this roller coaster in the last 15 years of his life.
Mm-hmm.
From the time that he gets sick and is about to die, but he turns to the Lord. So he says, okay, you've got 15 more years. He becomes prideful about that. Things go bad, but he repents, for 2nd Chronicles. But then he falls down because he's still a little prideful when the envoys come. And his son, Manasseh, does incredible amounts of evil.
Right.
So much so, it's in 2nd Chronicles again, just barely mentions that, oh yeah, by the way, the king of Babylon captures him, puts a hook in his nose, and takes him to Babylon. But he repents, and he comes back, and he gets rid of the idols out and turns to the Lord. So in both of them, there's this roller coaster in how they live the country.
It's our story, isn't it? We're on a roller coaster all the time.
Can I throw in a thought here? And that is, we're seeing all of this. They're going into captivity. They're going to be purified. They're going to be brought back. God's in charge of making all of these big political moves, right? Anybody worried about Russia, the war? Anybody worried about the 24 election?
Please
Anybody
don't-
worried about
Please don't go there yet.
the economy? Anybody worried? Anybody got anything they're worried about? What might these passages that we're reading tell us about what we should be worried about? Are we right with God? Who's going to take care of us? It'll be our politicians. It'll be Social Security. It'll be your kids. Who's going to take care of us? Who's the only one that can take care of us? This is this awe thing. This is this moment where we should renew ourselves to this idea that there's really only one force in the universe that has the ability to bless us and knows what's right for us and has a plan to take care of everything. Mm-hmm. And he's going to do that whether we acknowledge it or not.
Yeah, and so what we're seeing through the rest of Isaiah, stuff that we also saw in Daniel, is that whenever human beings are in charge, it'll get messed up. And if you think this generation is corrupt without the Lord, the next generation will be worse. And so nothing gets better without divine intervention. And so now as we get into like Isaiah chapter 52 and specifically 53, you're going to see a new type of king develop, or a suffering servant at least come about. So really you're starting to get the ideal of the kingdom from the Old Testament. You've heard it's this, but I'm going to tell you it's this. You think the world values this, I'm going to show you what God values. So Isaiah 53 is one of the most quoted Old Testament passages concerning Christ, right? This is, he grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. Why? What is everybody attracted to? Beauty and majesty. Come see my palace. Let me show you all the stuff that I had. Look at King Saul. He stands up a head and shoulders above the rest.
Come see my temple.
Come see my temple. And so there has to be a different kind of king. Sometimes people look at this and go, that must mean that Jesus was pretty ugly. Yes, I think it means he's ordinary. You would pass him in the grocery store and not go, oh, there's the King of Kings. You wouldn't do that. He looks like you and me. But if we go back to the Son of Man passage from Daniel 7, Jesus is going to be the Adam that we needed, but the one that failed. He's the second Adam, is what Paul's going to say, right? So we start to see this one that acts different. He's despised and rejected by human beings, a man of suffering, familiar with pain, like one from whom people hide their faces. He is despised, and we held him in low esteem. And surely he took up our pain and bore our sufferings, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions, he was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. I love that. I love that. And so we see there's a difference coming, and it's all going to be done to the Son. It's all going to be done to God's child. He's going to bear the brunt. He's going to bear all of it for our transgressions. That's why, to me, when Jesus stands up in the temple in the beginning of his ministry, is he in Nazareth, his hometown? I believe he is. And he goes to the scroll where that happens to be the reading for the day. And it's Isaiah 61. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has appointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for the captives and release from the darkness for the prisoner, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor and the day of vengeance of our God, to comfort all who mourn and provide for those who grieve in Zion. And when he gets done, rolls up the scroll and says, today it's been fulfilled. How do the people take that? You see, he doesn't look like a king. This is Jesus of Nazareth. This is the boy that grew up in our congregation. But also notice what kind of king he is. What does the king, or this new Son of Man, what does he care about? What does chapter 61 say? What is on his agenda? The poor, justice, taking care of the brokenhearted, to proclaim freedom for captives. He flips the script, right? Usually this is what a king wants to do to people. Make them subjective, make them poorer so you can become rich. You're going to take all kinds of people captive, but when you become king, you're going to put to death pretty much the entire bloodline before you, right? And now we have a new one that comes on the scene. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord. What does it mean to be sovereign? That's the whole book of Daniel, right? Who's in charge? The Spirit of the Lord who is in charge, who reigns above all else, is on me because he has anointed me. There's that king language. He has anointed me to proclaim good news. In Greek, later on, that'll be gospel. Good news to who? It's not just to the rich, not just to royalty, but now we have a shot in this new kingdom. So, man, good stuff. And I skipped over chapter 58, which might be my favorite chapter in the whole thing. What real fasting is. But when you look at 61 and see what this anointed one is really all about, that makes 58 make a lot of sense too. We talked about this a little bit last week, but people are like, why do we fast? And you don't do what we want, God. They want a puppet on a string. We fasted. You're supposed to do what we ask now. Do we realize that this is not what fasting is? I think this is one reason why a lot of us in the church have such a hard time with fasting, because it becomes a really self-righteous thing pretty quickly. But he says, if you want to know what real fasting is, do away with the yoke of oppression. Spend yourself on behalf of the hungry. Satisfy the needs of the oppressed. That goes right along with Isaiah 61.
So what do we do? What do you do when you feel like the world is out of control? What do you do when you feel like your life is out of control? What do we do when you feel like your family's out of control? What do we do? Pray. Why do we pray? What do we expect to come from prayer? Answers, solutions. There's no higher power than the yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure. Sometimes he says no. Sometimes he says later. A lot of times he says, not the way you think.
It's a time when we repent, too.
Yes. It's a time when we cry and we go, I don't like this. Please make it stop. Yes. Is God too busy? Are there too many things that God's working on today to make space for his plan for you? That's a faith question, right? And I would take it back to, if we have a God who can speak the universe into being, and we have a God who can control the destiny of his nation and the destiny of the universe, and we have a God, as Daryl said this morning, that when Daniel prayed, that a word was sent out and Gabriel immediately was dispatched. We have a God who listens, and we have a God who is more than capable of taking care of what concerns us. There's even a song about that. What else can we do? What else should we do? when we feel out of control? What can the church do when we feel out of control? Do we hide? Do we go zealot and go off? Surrender? Submit? Care for others. How about that? How about do some of the things that God actually asked us to do to make the world around us look more like He's here? There's stuff for us to do. Maybe your vote isn't going to change the outcome. Maybe you don't know who to vote for. Maybe the candidates that we have on the ballot in the next couple of years, none of them are going to fix anything. Maybe caring for your neighbor, maybe making your community better, maybe encouraging more ethics and morality, maybe caring for those who need help, maybe teaching our children, maybe all those things. Maybe those are far more powerful than we have ever thought when it came to participating in what God's already wanting to do and changing the world around us.
Mm-hmm. I'll also say, since I talked about confession this morning, at the end of my sermon, that's probably the first time I've prayed like that in a long time. And it made me realize this week that my prayers are often a wish list of stuff I want God to change, and I'm not willing to change myself. And so I think if you want to change the world, they say start by changing yourself. I think we need to, when you preach a sermon on repentance, people's ears pop up like, oh no, what's getting ready to go down? Right? Because we don't talk about it enough. It would be great if we preach sermons on repentance and go, yeah, that sounds about right. We do this every week. But we don't. So if we want the world to change, if we want to pass the baton to the next generation, repentance and confession are going to have to become mainstays in our prayer lives and in our communities. So,
don't forget to grab your reading order for this next month. Kobe Poole is going to be co-teaching this next month for us, and looking forward to that. But if you are behind on your reading and you want to go catch up, that's great. But don't catch up without keeping up. So if you've kind of fallen off of the reading schedule, grab the reading order and just start where we are, and look forward to being with you guys next week. Thank you.